When a nation is humiliated on the global stage, it is not merely its armies or institutions that suffer the blow. It is the very core of its self-perception that is shaken. Humiliation pierces deeper than the physical. It does not simply bruise the body of a people. It disorients the spirit. The strike that Iran endured was not just one of missiles. It was a strike upon dignity, upon national identity, upon the mask that nations wear when they stand before the world. But such a moment, though painful, is also revelatory, because in the echo of the explosion, something is heard, something that was buried beneath layers of pride, fear, ambition, and illusion. That sound is the truth of internal disorder. For no structure collapses unless it is hollow. No spirit breaks unless it has already grown brittle from within. To understand the humiliation Iran experienced is to look beyond the reports, beyond the fire and ash. It is to sit in the stillness after the event and ask, what allowed this to happen? What imbalance was already present before the first missile ever took flight? For humiliation is not the result of defeat. It is the exposure of weakness that was long ignored. Like a cracked foundation hidden by fresh paint, when pressure is applied, the flaw reveals itself. This is why external defeat often unveils an internal truth. The greater the outcry, the deeper the wound. The more theatrical the response, the more fragile the ego. Iran's leadership in the wake of these strikes must confront not just the might of its adversary, but the state of its own house. A warrior who loses a duel does not blame only his opponent. He also studies his own stance, his readiness, his mind. Did he anticipate the strike? Was he prepared? Did his training betray him? So too must a nation, when struck, pause not simply to condemn the attack, but to reflect upon the gaps in vigilance, strategy, unity, and spiritual awareness. These are the real battlegrounds. These are the places where the seeds of humiliation are first planted. When a nation reacts only with anger and retaliation, it is often a sign that it has not yet looked within. But if the leadership has the courage to sit in silence, to feel the full weight of the moment, to acknowledge the shame without rushing to cover it, then something powerful can begin to stir. Because shame, when faced fully, becomes a catalyst. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a teacher. And in this space of honesty, transformation is possible. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. The humiliation, painful as it is, becomes the pressure that forces a return to internal discipline. For years, nations built monuments, armies, parades, symbols of strength and sovereignty, but these are masks, and masks, while powerful, are not permanent. The world sees what is shown, but in moments of crisis, the mask is torn, and what is underneath is revealed, not to the world, but to the nation itself. This is the deeper meaning of being humiliated. It is not an event inflicted by another. It is a revelation of what was already hidden inside. That is why some can be struck and remain unbroken, while others fall apart. It is not the strike, it is the state of what it hits. Iran must now decide whether it will learn from this exposure or hide it, whether it will rebuild from the inside or simply cover the wound with words and symbols. The instinct to restore image quickly is strong, but image is not real, and reality, though uncomfortable, is where the real work must be done. Internal disorder is not resolved by external statements. It is healed through alignment, reflection, and discipline. Humiliation, though bitter, is often the door through which order returns, but only if one has the patience to walk through it without shame, and the courage to sit in its silence. Just as a martial artist must constantly return to the basics, the stance, the breath, the awareness, so too must a nation return to its foundations in the face of humiliation. Are its leaders guided by clarity or ego? Are its decisions rooted in wisdom or reaction? Is its strength real or is it postured? These questions are not asked aloud in press conferences, but they must be asked behind closed doors, in moments of stillness, because if they are not asked, the lesson is missed, and what is not healed in this moment will rise again in another more painful one. There is great power in facing what others run from. When a person or a nation is willing to acknowledge humiliation without denial or justification, they claim power over it. They do not become smaller in doing so, they become clearer. The cloud of illusion lifts, the noise of performance fades, and what remains is truth. This is not weakness. This is the beginning of real strength. For the strength that endures is not built on pride, it is built on insight. It is forged in the fire of humility. And that humility, when accepted, becomes the foundation upon which new strength can be built. Not for display, but for survival. It is easy to judge a nation by how it strikes, but the wiser question is how it rises after it has been struck. Does it rise with noise, seeking vengeance, or does it rise with silence, having learned something of itself? Does it seek to impress others, or does it seek to master itself? These are the tests of true power, and in these tests, many fail, not because they are weak, but because they cannot bear to look within. But if Iran chooses the harder path, the path of inner reflection, of discipline, of quiet strength, then this humiliation will not be its end. It will be its turning. In the end, humiliation does not define a nation. The response to it does. And that response, when drawn not from fear, but from clarity, becomes a new beginning. A beginning not built on retaliation or image, but on a foundation of truth. And in truth there is a power greater than armies, greater than missiles, greater than pride. There is peace. Not the peace that comes from victory, but the peace that comes from self-mastery. And in this mastery a nation may bend, but it will not break, because it has discovered that the greatest strength does not lie in how one appears, but in who one truly is. In the world of geopolitics, power is often mistaken for visibility. The more visible the strength, the more feared it appears. But this kind of power is deceptive. It is like the roar of thunder that follows lightning. Loud, dramatic, but only echoing what has already passed. When Iran scrambled to respond after the US airstrikes, it was not driven by strategy, but by something more fragile. The need to be seen as powerful. The desperate desire to maintain face, but when power is used to mask insecurity, it becomes noise, not command. The illusion of power may satisfy the eyes of the public, but it never satisfies the soul of a nation. In many ancient traditions, the concept of face is deeply rooted. To lose face is to lose honor. To save face is to preserve dignity. But when the pursuit of saving face outweighs the pursuit of truth, the result is a hollow performance. Iran's response, crafted to appear calculated and deliberate, was not built on genuine strength. It was built on the fear of how it would be perceived if it did nothing. And this fear becomes a prison. A nation trapped in a constant need to prove itself to others forgets how to understand itself. Power that is used to impress is a fragile thing. It relies on the opinions of others. It requires constant affirmation, constant displace, constant reinforcement, and it does not reconcile. It relies on the opinions of others. It requires constant affirmation, constant displace, constant reinforcement. But real power needs no audience. It exists quietly, like the strength of a mountain. When Iran's leaders chose to respond, not out of strategic necessity, but to maintain their image before the world, they revealed how tightly their decisions are bound to perception. The world does not need another performance. It needs truth. And the truth is that the illusion of power can be more dangerous than power itself, because illusion blinds. It deceives the one who holds it more than the one who watches. When a country seeks to restore its pride by issuing symbolic warnings or launching reactionary rhetoric, it becomes clear that its actions are not grounded in wisdom, but in fear. And fear always distorts clarity. The mind clouded by fear sees enemies in every shadow, hears threats in every whisper. It reacts not from purpose, but from panic. Iran's symbolic responses, though designed to project stability, did little to restore real strategic advantage. Instead, they reinforced the very perception they sought to counter, that the strikes had shaken their center. In trying to look strong, they revealed the vulnerability that strength was meant to conceal. The need to save face is not a strength. It is a symptom of an internal system that values image over a symptom of leadership that fears silence more than it fears mistakes. True strength would have been to pause, to assess, to reorganize from within, but that path is rarely chosen because it is not as immediate. It does not generate headlines or satisfy the hunger of those watching, but it is the only path that leads to enduring power. The rest is just noise. It is easy to speak loudly. It is harder to speak wisely. When a person is attacked and immediately retaliates, we do not always call them strong. Sometimes we call them emotional, reactive, undisciplined. Nations are no different. The true test of a nation's strength is not how quickly it strikes back, but how clearly it understands the blow it received. Iran's actions, framed as a calculated response, did not come from deep strategy. They came from the psychological need to not appear wounded. And that is where illusion steps in, dressing fear in the clothing of courage. In a world where image can shape influence, the temptation to uphold illusions is powerful. But illusions do not last. They demand too much. They demand constant maintenance. They require a nation to keep performing, keep spinning the story, keep pretending. And while the world watches, the real foundation begins to rot. A government that acts from illusion must keep lying to itself. It must suppress any internal voice that questions the performance. And over time, it no longer knows what is real and what is not. But there is a better way. Power, when it comes from inner order, does not need to react. It can wait. It can be still. It can calculate and decide based not on public pressure, but on deep wisdom. The greatest warriors are not the ones who fight every battle. They are the ones who know which battle is worthy of their energy. And nations must learn the same lesson. Iran, in the aftermath of the strikes, had an opportunity not to flex, but to listen. To its people, to its generals, to its history, and to the deeper voice within that whispers truth when ego is quiet. When the illusion of power guides a nation, everything becomes theater, even diplomacy, even defense. And in theater, the goal is not resolution, it is applause. But applause fades. And when it does, the nation finds itself alone, with no direction, only the echo of its own performance. Iran's actions may have satisfied some who needed reassurance in the moment, but the deeper question remains, what is the cost of that reassurance? And how long can it last? In a time when missiles can cross borders in minutes, the most valuable weapon a nation has is not military. It is wisdom. Wisdom that can see through illusion, wisdom that knows when to act and when to wait, wisdom that understands that face is not what others see, but what you see when you look in the mirror. And if that reflection is distorted by ego, then no amount of international praise can restore what has been lost. The illusion of power leads to cycles of conflict. One nation reacts to preserve its pride, another responds to protect its reputation, and the spiral continues. But when one side chooses to break the cycle not by surrendering, but by stepping back, breathing, and seeing clearly, that is when something new can begin. Iran could have been that example. It still can be. Not by denying what happened, but by transforming what it means. There is a difference between protecting one's sovereignty and protecting one's image. The former is necessary, the latter is vanity. And vanity, whether personal or national, is always hungry. It is never satisfied. It demands more shows, more gestures, more illusion, and it devours the truth in the process. But the path of clarity is different. It is not loud, it is not theatrical, it is steady, it is honest, and it is feared, not because it shouts, but because it cannot be shaken. When the smoke clears and the world looks elsewhere, Iran will be left with a choice: to keep up the illusion or to build something real, to chase applause or to cultivate strength, to save face or to find its face. The illusion is easier, but only the real will last. And only the real will bring peace. Not just with the world, but within itself. In the silence that follows a violent encounter, what a nation chooses to do next reveals the state of its inner discipline. A country may possess advanced weaponry, influential alliances, and vocal propaganda, but if its actions are driven by impulse rather than insight, it lacks the one element that sustains true power: awareness. When Iran found itself struck by precise US airstrikes, the moment did not call for loud declarations or swift retaliation. It called for stillness. Yet, like many nations before it, Iran responded not from the depth of awareness, but from the surface of reaction. Reactionary decisions, though loud and immediate, are the signs of a consciousness that has not mastered itself, and any entity, whether a person or a nation, that has not mastered itself will forever be a slave to the outside world. There is a fundamental difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic, it is primal, it arises from the depths of fear, pride, and emotion. It needs no reflection, it needs only a trigger. In contrast, response is deliberate. It is slow, it is born from clarity, patience, and wisdom. In the aftermath of humiliation, the ability to respond rather than react becomes the most vital expression of inner power. Iran's attempt to assert its relevance in the wake of military embarrassment was a reaction, not a response. In the aftermath of humiliation, the ability to respond rather than react becomes the most vital expression. In the wake of military embarrassment was a reaction, not a response. And in reacting, it lost the opportunity to demonstrate a higher level of command, not over its enemies, but over itself. A warrior trained only in combat but not in stillness will always be dangerous to himself. The same is true of a nation. The absence of spiritual awareness, of self-understanding, leads to decisions that may feel necessary but are in fact deeply misaligned with the long-term path of strength. When a nation reacts to humiliation with haste, it reveals that its foundation is not stable. Because the truly stable are not moved by the temporary. They are anchored in a clarity that does not flinch when tested. Iran's leadership, in rushing to craft a symbolic response, acted from the illusion that perception is more important than alignment. But alignment of values, of purpose, of identity is what holds a country together in crisis. Without it, every challenge becomes a reason to panic, and every setback becomes a catastrophe. Spiritual awareness in leadership does not mean withdrawal from the world, it means engagement with intention. It means understanding the energies that govern a decision before acting on them. Was Iran's countermove motivated by wisdom or by wounded pride? Was it guided by long-term vision or short-term optics? Was it rooted in stability or driven by pressure? These questions may not be spoken in public meetings or national broadcasts, but they live in the heart of every true leader. And when ignored, the consequences are visible to the world. It is easy to build weapons, it is harder to build awareness. The former requires resources, the latter requires discipline, but it is discipline, not firepower, that determines the endurance of a nation. Reactionary governments fall into patterns. Provocation, retaliation, escalation, repeat. Each cycle consumes more energy, more resources and more lives, and none of it brings clarity. Iran, by reacting without inward reflection, merely continued this cycle. There was no elevation, no transcending of the pattern. Only another step on the same worn path. But even in this, there is hope. Because every reaction, once seen clearly, becomes a lesson. And if that lesson is embraced, the next decision can come from a place of deep knowing rather than shallow fear. A spiritually aware mind does not fear being struck. It fears acting from blindness. Because blindness, unlike external force, comes from within, and it infects everything. The plans, the diplomacy, the speeches, all become tainted by the need to prove something to the world. But what if nothing needed to be proved? What if, in the wake of humiliation, Iran had chosen stillness over sound, silence over show? What message would that have sent? It would have revealed that the blow, though damaging, did not reach the core. That beneath the symbols and slogans there is an unshakable center. That is the essence of spiritual awareness. Not immunity to pain, but immunity to panic. For centuries, nations have believed that strength lies in the size of their arsenal or the volume of their voice. Their silence. Their silence, 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 their silence. But true strength has always belonged to those who can maintain clarity when clarity is hardest to maintain. To react is to allow your enemy to dictate your next move. To respond is to reclaim control. Iran's leadership had an opportunity to step into this space, to show the world and its people that its power was not just in weapons, but in wisdom. But wisdom cannot arise without awareness. It is in moments of defeat that the inner structure is tested. A tree may stand tall in calm weather, but its roots are revealed in a storm. Iran's reaction to the airstrikes was like a tree swaying violently, not because of the wind, but because of shallow roots. The roots of a nation are its values, its discipline, its ability to pause and choose a path aligned with truth. Not just for now, but for generations to come. And leadership lacks this awareness. It sacrifices the future to protect the image of the present. And this is a costly trade. The cultivation of awareness is not a luxury, it is a necessity, especially for those who guide nations. It requires practices that go beyond politics, reflection, meditation, honest discourse, restraint. These are not soft skills, they are survival skills. Because without them, every insult becomes a reason for escalation. Every challenge becomes a crisis. Every loss becomes an identity crisis. But with awareness, a loss is just a lesson. A crisis is just a doorway, and a blow to the ego is just a moment of cleansing. Iran's moment of humiliation will not be remembered for how many statements were made or how many threats were returned. It will be remembered for the direction it chose to take afterward. And that direction reveals everything. Did the nation turn inward or outward? Did it seek revenge or realization? Did it act from fear or from freedom? These questions do not disappear after the news cycle fades. They echo in the decisions that follow. Let this be the turning point, not just for Iran, but for all who observe. Let this moment remind us that real leadership is not reactive, it is rooted. And roots are grown not in the fire of anger, but in the stillness of understanding. Spiritual awareness is not weakness, it is the discipline to remain unmoved by provocation, untouched by illusion, and unshaken by temporary loss. It is the ability to see clearly when others are blinded by fear. And in that clarity there is peace. Not because conflict disappears, but because the mind no longer creates more of it. The greatest decision a nation can make is not to retaliate. It is to see. And once it sees, it can act. Not from pain, but from purpose. Not from pride, but from presence. And in that presence, even humiliation becomes a gift. A gift that burns away illusion, reveals truth, and invites the birth of something greater. When all appearances fall away and the dust of confrontation settles, the final measure of a nation's strength is not found in what it shows to others, but in what it finds within itself. In the aftermath of the airstrikes that shook Iran's infrastructure and pride, the world watched closely for retaliation. Some expected fire, some expected words, but very few expected what would have been the most powerful response: stillness, clarity, and the restoration of internal harmony. Yet this is precisely where the path to true strength begins. Not with declarations of vengeance or the rattling of weapons, but with a quiet, unwavering return to order within. A nation that finds its balance amidst chaos becomes ungovernable by fear. And this is where Iran must go. Not outward into the realm where real power is born and shaped. To retaliate is easy. It takes only a moment of anger, a rush of blood, and a desire to match pain with pain. But to pause, to observe the wound, to tend to the internal cracks revealed by humiliation, that is the work of strength few are willing to undertake. Yet, it is this discipline that determines the rise or fall of empires. Not how well they strike back, but how deeply they rebuild. Iran has an opportunity now not to prove its dominance, but to demonstrate its wisdom. And in this age, wisdom is rare, But when present, it shines brighter than any weapon ever could. Because wisdom chooses what pride fears, the path of restoration over retaliation. A response rooted in internal clarity says to the world, we are not shaken because we know who we are. That kind of statement requires no microphone, no press conference, no parade of missiles. It is spoken in how a nation treats its people after a blow, in how it steadies its systems, in how it listens rather than reacts. Iran, in the glare of humiliation, has been given a gift disguised as defeat, the chance to assess not its enemy, but itself, to look at where its vulnerabilities lie, not just militarily, but morally, culturally, structurally. This kind of introspection cannot happen while ego is in control. Ego demands revenge. Wisdom demands reflection. Restoring internal clarity is not a passive act. It is the most active, demanding, courageous thing a nation can do. It means calling its leaders to stillness, not to shouting. It means holding honest dialogues, not just with allies, but with critics. It means investing in the resilience of its people, not in the image of its government. For a nation is not only its flags and leaders, it is the soul of its citizens. When that soul is anchored, no external force can uproot it. Iran must recognize this. The next battle is not in the air. It is in the soul of the country itself. When a house shakes, it is the foundation that must be checked, not the roof. Iran's response must begin at the root. What are the principles guiding its decisions? Are they rooted in long-term survival or short-term reaction? Are they shaped by integrity or image? The answers will not be found in weapons or speeches, but in policies, in education, in transparency, and in the daily life of its people. For when internal clarity is restored, a country no longer fears being seen as weak, because it knows it is not. Clarity within also requires the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. The illusion of infallibility must be dropped. The idea that a nation can never be hurt or never make mistakes must be released. Only then does learning begin. And with learning comes evolution. Without evolution, there is only repetition. Iran must decide. Will it evolve, or will it repeat the cycles of reaction that have long defined geopolitical tensions? Will it build resilience, or maintain the illusion of strength? The future depends not on what it can destroy, but on what it can heal. Healing, too, is not softness. It is power. The world misunderstands this. It sees the act of caring for one's inner stability as weakness. But healing requires confronting wounds, not ignoring them. It requires discipline, consistency, and leadership that can see beyond its own pride. Iran's healing begins not with retribution, but with recalibration, with the decision to become not louder, but wiser, not more aggressive, but more intentional. This shift in posture redefines the narrative. No longer is the nation reacting to external blows, it is choosing its own path, unmoved by the pressures of perception. In this posture of inner clarity, Iran will find its greatest weapon, not made of metal, but of mindset. A mindset that cannot be manipulated by provocation. A mindset that sees through the chaos of international games and remains centered in its mission. That mission must be to grow beyond the current moment, to rise not through confrontation, but through construction, of unity, of transparency, of systems that serve its people. These are the marks of real strength, not the fleeting satisfaction of symbolic retaliation. The world is watching. But more importantly, the people within Iran are watching. They are watching not for words, but for stability. Not for drama, but for direction. A leadership that sees this and acts from this awareness has already claimed victory. Not over an enemy, but over instability. And that kind of victory cannot be taken away, for it was not won in battle, but in awareness. It is time Iran chooses that victory, not by pretending nothing happened, not by disguising humiliation as defiance, but by taking the wound and transforming it into wisdom, by taking the silence that follows the blast and filling it not with noise, but with purpose. There is a river that flows beneath all the surface noise of politics and war. It is the river of intention. Those who drink from it do not act out of compulsion, they act from clarity. And when they do, their actions carry a different weight. Iran must drink from this river now. To restore clarity is to return to that flow. It is to move not with desperation but with deliberation, not with fear but with focus. And from that place, even the greatest humiliation becomes a stepping stone to sovereignty, not just of borders, but of the soul. In the end, the question is simple. What will define Iran now? The noise of reaction or the strength of reflection? The illusion of power or the reality of self-mastery? If it chooses reflection, if it chooses discipline, if it chooses to restore clarity within its heart, then no matter what the world says, it will have already won. Because a nation that knows itself cannot be defeated. It may fall, it may be struck, but it will rise, not with fury, but with focus. And that kind of rise echoes through history far longer than any missile ever could.